Greetings, YouTube. As of April 4th, time of the article I'm going to be quoting, Tennessee was not doomed. Apparently, one Kurt Zimmerman has a high school student in the Zaragut High School and questioned the honors biology book that his son brought home because it does, in his opinion, have a questionable view of creationism. Creationism isn't science. Now, the textbook in question refers to creationism as a Judeo-Christian myth for explaining the creation of our Earth and all life on it in a 7-day period. And to my mind, that's a pretty apt summation of what creationism is. Though, realistically, the story of Genesis is not creationism. Creationism is an interpretation of the story of Genesis. And technically, Genesis itself is a myth. Creationism is just bad science, because it isn't science. There is no such thing as creation science. There is no such thing as a really functional, intelligent design theory. None of these things are science. And the original Genesis myth is not science. It's an allegory for discussing how early Jews and Christians viewed their God's creation of the universe. And that's all well and good, and you're entitled to believe that. You're entitled to teach it. You're entitled to hold it dear to your heart. You may cleave it to your bosom if you choose. But it is not science, and it has no place in a science textbook. Now, if creation science or the intelligent design theory were actual science and actually presented a competing theory to evolution, there are some steps involved in that process. First, you would have to gather data. Then you do research based on that data. That often requires you to do more data gathering and more research. Eventually, you get to a point where you can write an article or articles. You then submit them to journals. And if you're lucky, they get published in those peer-reviewed journals. And then people read the articles. They take the theory that you've presented them. They drive it around, kick the tires, check and see if it actually makes sense. Can they replicate your research information? Is the data correlated by someone else? Can you say, yep, their data, my data, they match? And if all that functions, and it's a better theory than the one that you're competing with, then your theory wins. And your theory then becomes adopted by the scientific community. Unfortunately, this process often takes quite a while because you don't really just change the minds of current researchers. You usually have to wait for the people who are of the old school of thought to die off and a new generation of researchers to adopt the new theory. And this is all well and good if creation science were an actual scientific theory, but it isn't. You see, the first two parts I mentioned, the gathering data and the research part, are missing in the whole creation science intelligent design theory process. All they have is a conclusion. And when you start with a conclusion, it is not science. It cannot be refuted. It cannot be changed. A conclusion is done. Case closed. And in that case, it's not science. You don't have a conclusion and then gather data and research to support it. You gather data and research, and eventually, if you're lucky, you end up coming up with a conclusion that makes sense. Now, I understand why creation science is popular in many people's minds. Because religions, many religions, not all religions, many religions present you with nice, stable conclusions. They are often literally carved in stone. They do not change. They are eternal. The religion presents this information as this is the way it's always been, this is the way it is now, and this is the way it always shall be. This is very comforting to a certain segment of society. They like that stability. I can understand that. It is, however, not science. And a lot of people don't like science because they see it as inherently unstable. Because the theory that existed 100 years ago is no longer being used, the theory being used now is very well likely going to be replaced or modified at least over time. And in the future, that theory will have changed or been replaced. We used to believe that there was a liquid, invisible liquid, that transferred heat from object to object. No, it's just radiation. But we didn't have the theory of radiation then, so people came up with a theory that explained it within a concept that they did understand. They were wrong, new model came around, replaced the old model, everybody moves on. That's how science works. It is inherently about change. So I can understand why people don't like evolutionary theory. I really can. But because you don't like something doesn't make it not true. It just means you don't like it. And you don't get to impose your opinion and your likes and dislikes upon other people, nor upon the very fabric of reality itself. And that is what you are trying to do when you try to put a religious belief into a science class. You are trying to put your faith into a secular environment in the hopes of converting others to coming around to your way of thinking. And a school needs to be a secular environment so that people may freely exchange ideas and thoughts without concern of sectarian conflict and confrontation. So at least for today, Tennessee is not doomed. And that's a good thing, folks.